Let's start this explainer by picturing a scene that is universally relatable. I want you to imagine a couple standing right in the middle of the kitchen of their starter home, and they're getting ready to move up in the world. Really picture them for a second. They've got the keys in hand, maybe a couple of moving boxes stacked in the corner, taking one last nostalgic look around the place. Now, this could be a starter condo in Austin, a semi-detached house just outside Manchester, a two-bedroom flat in Bangalore, or even a modest bungalow in the suburbs of Toronto. The currency changes, the accents change, but the core story, it is remarkably identical all across the globe. We've all seen this play out. They bought this modest first property maybe 5 to 8 years ago, they lived in it, they built some solid equity, they grew their careers, and now? Well, life happens, and they just need something bigger. Maybe there's a nursery coming, or perhaps a new remote job suddenly demands a dedicated, quiet home office. Whatever the catalyst is, the writing is on the wall. It is time to move on. And right at that exact moment, amidst the packing tape and the nostalgia, someone almost always says this exact sentence: "Why don't we just keep this place and rent it out?" Look, in the moment, standing right there in that kitchen, it feels like the smartest, most sophisticated financial idea in the room. I mean, the current mortgage payment is probably already quite low relative to today's sky-high rents. Plus, you absolutely know a friend of a friend who did this exact thing a decade ago, and they talk about it at dinner parties like the house literally just prints money in the basement. Keeping the home and renting it out, it feels less like an active, risky business decision and way more like an obvious inheritance of free wealth. It feels like the universe is handing you a second income stream simply as a reward for not selling. But today we are going to use the storytelling method to walk step by step through the honest, completely unvarnished math of what actually happens next when you make that choice. Section 1. The cash flow illusion. Let's do the simple math. Okay, let's say our hypothetical couple bought their home 8 years ago for $310,000. Fast forward to today, the remaining mortgage balance has been paid down to $220,000, and their monthly payment is sitting at a very comfortable $1,340. Now they hop online, they look at the local rental market, and they realize, wow, they can actually rent this exact home out for $2,600 a month. So they pull out their phone calculator, subtracting that $1,340 mortgage from the $2,600 rent leaves a glorious massive profit of $1,260 a month. That is roughly $15,000 a year in what looks like completely free, unencumbered cash flow on a house they already own and know inside out. This makes it feel like the absolute easiest money they will ever make in their entire lives. And I've got to tell you, this is the precise, dangerous moment where most people put down the calculator, smile at each other, and start mentally planning their early retirement. It is an incredibly seductive illusion.
So, what is the problem here? Well, the crucial point is that this simple napkin arithmetic completely ignores what it actually costs to own, operate, and maintain physical real estate. The quiet, uncomfortable truth that literally nobody mentions in that kitchen is that your starter home was never built, never priced, and never located to be a fully optimized investment property. Think about it. You bought it for the good school district, or the easy commute, or honestly, just because the backyard gave you a really good feeling. Real professional investment properties are bought based on hard math, capitalization rates, rent-to-price ratios, and exit liquidity. By deciding to keep it, you are essentially buying an investment property today using absolutely none of the strict criteria that an actual real estate investor uses. You are dangerously confusing top-line revenue with bottom-line profit.
Now, watch how incredibly quickly those hidden everyday realities completely devour that illusory monthly profit, down to break even, or sometimes even worse. Let's really break this down slice by slice. First up, landlord insurance. It runs meaningfully higher. We're talking often 15 to 25% more than your standard homeowners insurance because insurers have to explicitly price in liability and loss of rent risks. Second, vacancy. You might think, oh, my market is super hot, I'll always have a tenant. But you still absolutely must budget a 5 to 8% allowance for natural turnover. That is basically wiping out an entire month of rent every single year just for the time it takes to clean, paint, and relist. Third, maintenance. The golden unbreakable rule here is 1% of the property's total value per year. So, on a home now worth, say, $460,000, that's $4,600 a year or almost $400 a month, literally just sitting in a bank account waiting for the furnace to die or the roof to leak. Fourth, property management. That takes another 8 to 10% off the top of collected rent. And I know what you're thinking, I'll just save that money by managing it myself. Well, if you do that, you aren't saving anything. You are just paying that fee in unpaid labor, midnight stress, and completely ruined weekends. Finally, any tiny sliver of profit that actually survives all of that is immediately hit with ordinary income tax, taking another 24 to 37% depending on your specific tax bracket.
So suddenly, that beautiful $1,260 a month shrinks to almost nothing, turning your first few years as a landlord into a frustrating cash flow neutral slog.
Section 2. The opportunity cost. The real return nobody calculates.
So all of those expenses we just talked about, they build into what is arguably the single most important yet widely ignored number in this entire decision, the massive silent cost of trapped equity. Remember, our couple owes $220,000 on a home that is now worth $460,000. That leaves $240,000 of pure usable equity just sitting dead inside those drywall walls. By locking that money into one highly labor-intensive asset in one specific zip code, they are quietly missing out on the wealth-building power of the broader stock market. Let's look at scenario A. They keep the rental. After all those grinding expenses we just discussed, the actual cash flow is tiny. Even if you generously add in historical home appreciation, their total return is roughly 7 to 8%. But crucially, that return is highly illiquid, incredibly labor-intensive, and comes with the joy of 2 a.m. plumbing emergencies. Now flip the script and look at scenario B. They sell the house. They net around $220,000 in cash after closing costs, and they invest it in a perfectly boring, highly diversified, low-cost index fund. Historically returning 9 to 10% annually, this money is completely liquid. If life throws them a massive curveball, they can access it instantly with absolute zero tenant risk. That is the true opportunity cost they are paying every single day they hold on to that house.
Section 3. The ticking tax clock. The invisible deadline on your wealth.
But listen, the story gets even more urgent when we start looking at the severe tax traps waiting for accidental landlords. Honestly, this is the part of the story that creates true, deep financial regret, because it involves rigid rules that operate completely in the background without you even knowing it. The very moment you pack up that moving truck and move out of your starter home, you activate an invisible, ticking clock on a massive, once-in-a-lifetime tax shield. Under U.S. tax law, there's something called the Section 121 exclusion, and it is practically a magical provision. If you are married and filing jointly, it allows you to literally walk away with up to $500,000 of pure profit from the sale of your primary residence, completely tax-free. Not a single dime to the IRS. If you are single, it's up to $250,000. But the catch is absolute and unforgiving. You must have lived in that home as your primary residence for at least 2 of the 5 years immediately preceding the sale.
What this means is that keeping the rental isn't just a neutral wait-and-see decision. Every single year of hesitation brings you one step closer to permanently losing a 6-figure tax shield. Just think about how this plays out in real life. You move out, you get your first tenant, and the clock officially starts ticking. For the first 2 to 3 years, you have a grace period. Life is good. You could still decide to sell the rental and take your massive tax-free gain right to the bank. But once you cross that 3-year mark, your eligibility begins to severely erode. And the day you hit year 5, that incredible tax exclusion is gone entirely. It just vanishes into thin air.
Once that crucial 5-year window slams shut, deciding to finally sell triggers a brutal combination of federal, state, and depreciation recapture taxes that can easily erase up to $45,000. That wipes out literal years of your rental cash flow in a single stroke at the closing table. Let's look at our couple's specific case. They had about a $150,000 gain on the property. If they had just sold within that golden 5-year window, that entire gain was completely untouchable by the IRS. But by waiting until year 6 to sell, just because they were busy or indecisive, they suddenly face a 15% federal capital gains tax, state taxes that can range anywhere from 5 to 13%, plus a painful 25% tax to recapture any depreciation they claimed while renting it out. They might literally hand over $45,000 of their hard-earned wealth to the government simply because they decided to casually wait and see.
Section 4. The global lens. It's not just a U.S. problem.
Now, while the U.S. has its specific tax mechanisms, the core economic forces that heavily penalize these accidental rentals are practically universal across the entire globe. Governments worldwide offer incredible tax advantages to primary residences that they simply do not and will not extend to investment properties. Take the UK, for example. Buy-to-let landlords there have been mercilessly squeezed by the removal of mortgage interest tax relief and massive stamp duty surcharges. In Canada, the second you turn your home into a rental, you immediately stop the accrual of the principal residence exemption, and you can even trigger aggressive vacant home taxes. Down in Australia, while a system called negative gearing does allow you to offset rental losses against your personal income, it is an incredibly risky game that relies entirely on hoping the property appreciates enough to eventually justify years of operating at a monthly loss. And if you look at emerging markets like India or Brazil, residential rental yields are structurally tiny, often just 2 to 4%, simply because home prices there have skyrocketed vastly faster than local rents can keep up with. So the global lesson here is crystal clear. Stepping out of our primary residence means stepping squarely into a heavily taxed and heavily regulated asset class.
Section 5. When renting makes sense. The math of a deliberate landlord.
Okay, I know I've been tough on the idea, but none of this means renting is always 100% a terrible idea. But there is a massive caveat. It only makes sense provided you completely stop thinking like a sentimental homeowner and immediately start thinking like a ruthless small business operator. If you can honestly look in the mirror and check off several of these strict criteria, then keeping the home actually becomes mathematically defensible. It transforms from a nostalgic mistake into a calculated business decision. First up, does it pass the famous 1% rule? That rule means your monthly rent is at least 1% of the total property's value. So for a $460,000 home, the rent needs to be $4,600 a month. Honestly, that is rarely the case for a typical starter home. Second, do you have an extraordinarily low fixed mortgage rate that creates a massive, undeniable spread against today's rental rates? Third, do you have a clear, active management plan with real maintenance reserves set aside so you aren't the one fixing toilets? Fourth, is your household wealth already highly diversified so that this one single house doesn't suddenly represent 80% of your entire net worth? And finally, is the home located near truly durable drivers of demand, like a massively growing hospital system or a major university? If you can confidently say yes to these, then the math finally starts to work in your favor.
And for those of you who absolutely insist on staying in the real estate game, but who rightly recognize that your sentimental starter home is actually a mathematically weak asset, there is a lifeline. The 1031 exchange offers a brilliant middle path to trade up, completely tax-free. So you've already converted the home to a rental and you've already painfully missed your primary residence exclusion window. U.S. tax law offers you an incredible maneuver. A 1031 exchange allows you to sell that high-maintenance, single-family rental and seamlessly roll the entire proceeds into a genuinely better, like-kind investment property. We're talking about trading up to a share in a professionally managed multifamily building or maybe a stable commercial property. It defers your capital gains tax entirely, keeping your wealth intact as long as you play by the rules. You have to identify the new property within 45 days and close the deal within 180 days. It completely reframes the choice. You don't have to stubbornly keep a bad asset just to avoid paying taxes. You can legally trade it for a genuinely better one.
Section 6. The ultimate reframing. The question to ask in the kitchen. So to wrap up our story, we need to go back to that kitchen. We need to completely replace this instinctual, seductive idea of free wealth with a much more rational, hard-nosed paradigm. Your starter home was amazing. It gave you a place to begin, it sheltered you, but its best, most powerful use is often simply providing you the liquid capital to build whatever comes next in your life. It shouldn't quietly become a stressful second job that you never actually applied for. So I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If you had $220,000 of pure cash sitting in your bank account today, would you proactively go out and spend it to buy this exact house, sight unseen, specifically as an investment property? If your honest answer to that question is no, then keeping the house is just an emotional decision wearing the clever costume of a financial one. Sell the house, take your massive tax-free gains, and let your wealth truly go to work for you. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time on this Explainer.